Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, when it comes to the end times, do not lose sight of this. What am I talking about? Well, we'll get to that in just a moment, but first I want to draw your attention to this. So this is the Substack that I launched last week, brittgillette.substack.com. And if you are signed up to that Substack, well, then you received an email yesterday with the first written post, the article that I've put up. If you're not subscribed to that, then just go to brittgillette.substack.com and you can read it in full. It's all free. But I encourage you to go there and check this out and read about. This is a topic that came up during the April 8th eclipse video that I put out, where there were some people claiming, well, the sign of Jonah, this is the sign of Jonah, the path of this eclipse, because it passed over several towns named Nineveh and one named Jonah. And I said, no, the sign of Jonah was fulfilled through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so that led to many people asking some questions, because that sign of Jonah that Jesus said was, for as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And there were people that said, well, how's that possible? How does Friday to Sunday equal 3 days and 3 nights? And so that is a good question. So this article delves into what the Bible says about that. So now keep in mind, when you go here, this may overturn a lot of thoughts that you already had about the timeline of the events that took place between the Last Supper and the resurrection of Jesus. But this article here, it gives scriptural references for the position that I'm taking. So, don't take my word for it. Go read it. Don't take my word for it, but study the scriptures for yourself to see if what I'm saying is true. If it's not, I'm open to the idea that I'm wrong, but present the scriptural case for why I'm wrong. Again, I've studied this in depth over the course of many years, and I believe this is what the Bible teaches, and this comes complete with a graphic that I created toward the end that will explain all of that. So again, go to brittgillette.substack.com and check that out. So back to our video. When it comes to the end times, do not lose sight of this. What is the this? Well, I think it's important to not lose sight of the big picture. And that's hard to do because we're here in this time, we're on this point in a timeline where it appears that things are moving very slowly, and when is all of this going to happen? People have been talking about this for many years. Of course, that plays in line with Peter's prophecy, right, that we've talked about before, where people are like, oh, people have been saying Jesus is coming back for centuries, and yet it hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. But guys, we can't lose sight of the big picture, and we need to make sure that we're not so caught up in the details of the news cycle and everything that's going on. And part of that may be the fault of me and others like me. I mean, just in the last week, we've talked about a banking crisis and how that could lead to a financial crisis, the rollout of central bank digital currency, which isn't the mark of the beast, but could lead to the mark of the beast. So all of these tangential news stories, occurrences, developments in the world that aren't direct fulfillments of Bible prophecy, but they're setting the stage for it. There's numerous the Elon Musk news story that we talked about in the last video. So some of these things that we can, there's a chance we could get caught up in the minutia of all of these individual news stories and everyone saying, Jesus is coming back, but he hasn't come back yet. And then you grow weary and give up. That's why it's important to step back, look at the big picture of where we stand today, where our generation is. So I'm going to go through a number of Bible scriptures. We're going to look at those. We're going to talk about, where we fit in that picture. So let's start right here with Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24. So this is Jesus speaking directly to the question he was asked of what is the sign of your coming, of the end of the age, and your return to establish your kingdom. And Jesus says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that the time of its destruction has arrived. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills, those in Jerusalem must get out, and those out in the country should not return to the city. For those will be days of God's vengeance, and the prophetic words of the scriptures will be fulfilled. How terrible it will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in those days, for there will be disaster in the land and great anger against his people. They will be killed by the sword or sent away as captives to all the nations of the world, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. Now, there are some people who believe there's some future fulfillment to this during the time of the tribulation, but clearly this was fulfilled at the time of in the year 70, AD 70, when Titus and the Roman legions came and destroyed the temple, sacked Jerusalem, killed the Jewish people by the sword, and sent away those who were left as captives to serve in the farthest corners of the Roman Empire as slaves. Right? So that was fulfilled. So Jesus was pointing to this time when the temple would be destroyed. That's actually how this conversation starts. And the disciples are pointing to all the magnificent architecture that's around them, and he says, not one stone will be left on another. All of this will be destroyed. So he's pointing to that future fulfillment just a few decades later of the destruction of Jerusalem, in particular the temple, by the Roman legions. And then he says, and Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. So guys, there's numerous prophecies within the Bible that point to God bringing his people, the nation of Israel, back into the land in the last days, just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. So the people were expelled from that land over a period of years, starting specifically with the destruction of the temple in the year 70. If we count the year 70 as the starting point, all the way to today, and look at that timeline from the year 70 to the year 2024. And then we look at, the people, the nation of Israel has been back in the land as a nation state since the year 1948. That seems like a long time because most of the people watching this aren't going to remember, hey, I remember when that was in the news. You were either born or not born yet, or you were a small child. Very few people will actually remember the news stories of Israel becomes a nation again. So we sort of take that for granted and go, well, this has been going on my whole life. This isn't a new sign. It's not what's changed. But guys, keep in mind, that's 96% of the history from the year 70 to the year 2024, that there was no nation of Israel. So stop and think about that for a moment. So 96% of that Christian history, there was no nation of Israel in the land of Israel. So that should give you some perspective, a big picture perspective on where we stand today and what times we're living in. We also notice Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. There are many people that believe that will completely come to an end when the Temple Mount is in full control of the Jewish people. But there's no doubt that when we look at history from the year 70 to the year 1967, Jerusalem was controlled by a series of Gentile empires. So Jerusalem was trampled by the Gentiles well, even if you don't believe that those times have not completely come to an end, we're a whole lot closer in the last, 57 years since the 6-Day War than we were prior to that. So again, that's 97% of that Christian history from the year 70 to today, where Jerusalem was not controlled by the Jewish people. So think about all the generations of Christians that could not point to these signs. They could not point to the nation of Israel back in the land. They could not point to the Jewish people in control of Jerusalem. That should tell you the big picture, what times we live in. How about this from Matthew chapter 24, verse 14? And the good news about the kingdom will be preached throughout the world so that all nations will hear it, and then the end will come. Again, the ultimate fulfillment of this prophecy will take place during the tribulation period. However, look at how close we are, how much closer we are to reaching the entire world with the good news of Jesus Christ, as opposed to past generations of Christians. Think of, when this was written, there were whole continents that the people who were reading these words did not know existed. Yet today we have the gospel being transmitted all over the world by missionaries, by satellites, by internet, by every means possible. People going into the farthest corners of the earth, into dense jungles, to bring the gospel to as many people as possible. Guys, we're much closer today than we have ever been before in seeing the fulfillment of this prophecy. And again, I think this is the most overlooked prophecy of the end times that there can be, because so many people, again, our entire lifetimes, we've seen missionaries around the world. So this doesn't seem unique to us, but think about how profound this was, that Jesus at this time was, hey, he's a carpenter with a few fishermen, tax collectors as followers. He's not a big king. He's on the edge of the Roman Empire. No one with a world view, with a worldly worldview, let me put it that way, would have imagined that they would see this prophecy fulfilled, that his message would go out to the whole earth. And again, for centuries, that message was largely confined to the area around the Mediterranean Sea. It's only in the last few centuries that we've seen the gospel go out all across the earth. So guys, this is pointing to the times in which we live. How about this right here? Revelation chapter 11, verses 7 through 10. This is talking about the two witnesses that will appear during the tribulation period. It says, when they complete their testimony, the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit will declare war against them, and he will conquer them and kill them, and their bodies will lie in the main street of Jerusalem, the city that is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt, the city where their Lord was crucified. And for 3.5 days, all peoples, tribes, languages, and nations will stare at their bodies. No one will be allowed to bury them, and the people who belong to this world will gloat over them and give presents to each other to celebrate the death of the two prophets who had tormented them. And when we imagine this picture that's being given, the entire world in a 3.5-day period is looking upon the bodies of these two dead witnesses. Now, how is that possible in previous generations outside of some sort of supernatural occurrence? And we could still see this fulfilled through some sort of supernatural occurrence, but ours is the first generation that doesn't need some sort of supernatural intervention in order for this prophecy to be fulfilled, because of the technology that we see all over the world today. Even in the poorest nations, cell phones are common. Most people have a mobile phone that they can connect to a live video feed of anywhere in the world. So it's very easy to imagine that once this event happens, people all over the world would be able to watch in real time without physically having to be at the location where this is taking place, and that the whole world would celebrate that. So guys, this is another indication of the times in which we live. How about this? Revelation chapter 13, verse 7. The beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation. So saying the Antichrist will have a global empire. And again, think about the enormity of this. Again, when this was written, the people who were reading it were unaware of that whole continents existed. South America, North America, Australia, probably didn't know the existence of Japan. There were many parts that they didn't necessarily realize how large the world was. But today, we are seeing the beginnings of global government in a way that we hadn't seen for much of Christian history. We've saw the League of Nations and the United Nations. We're seeing more and more talk of a global government, a global community, the formation of global institutions. And of course, we've talked about the technologies that would allow one nation to conquer the entire globe in some of the past videos. So again, we live in a generation that uniquely could see this take place in a way that no other generation could before. How about Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 17? This is about the mark of the beast. It says he required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead, and no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name. Again, it's very difficult for past generations to imagine how this would be fulfilled outside of supernatural intervention. But guys, we look at the technologies we have in the world today. We look at the rollout of central bank digital currencies. We talk about that in the West as if it's this coming thing, but in China, they already have it. And we see even in places like Canada, where they don't necessarily have central bank digital currency, we saw the Canadian truckers and how they were cut off from their bank accounts, from their ability to buy and sell, from the ability to pay their mortgage and to make other financial transactions by their government instantly. And so we can see the technology in place that's creating the foundation for this mark of the beast system. And that tells us, well, how near we are. And guys, there are so many other signs. We can't get into all of them today, but think of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog of Magog alliance. We're seeing that alliance come together right now, today, for the first time in history. And that was something that was written 2,600 years ago, foretold in advance by God 2,600 years ago. But we live in a time most people can't foretell what's going to happen in 26 days, much less 2,600 years, but God can. And all of these things are pointing to the specific time period in which we live. So what is that time period? Well, I believe very clearly it's the season of the Lord's return. And when I talk about that, these signs we're looking at, and we'll address this in a future video soon, but these aren't rapture signs. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the tribulation period, those events of the tribulation, and Jesus, his return at the end of that tribulation. The rapture is a signless event which could occur at any moment that I believe the Bible teaches will come before the 7-year tribulation. So if we see all of that, those events from the 7-year tribulation starting to form and come about and the stage being set, that tells us we are getting very close to that time period. And guys, that's exactly what Jesus says. So let's take a look at Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 through 33. Jesus says, "Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you can know his return is very near, right at the door." So what does this mean? It means when you look at You go outside in the spring and you see these trees starting to bud and you go, oh, it's a change of season. New things are happening. We're out of the winter. We're entering a new time. And Jesus is saying the same thing here. When you begin to see all these things take place, know that he is near, right at the door. Read the same thing in Mark chapter 13, verses 28 through 29. He says, now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things taking place, you can know his return is very near, right at the door. And we also read in Luke chapter 21, verse 28, he says, so when all these things begin to happen, stand and look up, for your salvation is near. So guys, we live in the season of the Lord's return. Jesus is coming, and he's coming soon. But the question many people have is, well, what does soon mean? They always want to pin down a date. I understand that. People want Jesus to come back as soon as possible. I do. I hope the rapture is today. But what does soon mean? What does Jesus say right here? Because when he says these things, he doesn't say, well, when you begin to see all these things take place, a few hundred years might pass, maybe, and then I'll come back. No, he says your salvation is near. So what does that mean? Well, let's go look it up. If we go look, this is from Bible Hub right here, Luke 21:28. And if we scroll down, we can look at the original language in here of what it means is drawing near. I bring near, I come near, or approach, right? So Jesus is near. Just as we said, for 96% of Christians couldn't point to really any of these signs throughout Christian history. If you count, well, really, if you count from before the year 70 when the temple was destroyed, we're looking at probably 93% of Christian history. None of these signs were around that we talked about today. None of them. So that tells you how amazing these times are, how different these times are that we're living in. Near isn't going to give people what they want. They want next Tuesday at 10:04 a.m. But near, soon, should be good enough. And now another thing that I hear people say is they say, well, no, when Jesus makes those statements in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, he's saying all the things he said were going to happen. Once you see those happen, then he's drawing near. And I would say that's not what he says. He says when you see these things begin to take place, when you see them begin to happen, that's when you should be looking up. If we're to wait to look up and wonder if he's right at the door until after we see all of those things, well, one of those things we would have to see is the abomination of desolation, which would take place at the midpoint of the tribulation. But we also had this. Let's take the same verse, Luke 21:28, but add the verse before, verse 27. What does that say? It says, then everyone will see the Son of Man coming on a cloud with power and great glory. Right? So if we were to wait for all of these things in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 to take place before we can say, I think this is the season, I think this is the general time frame of his return, well, we're going to be waiting right up until the very point when Jesus returns at the end of the tribulation. I think by then it will have long been apparent to anyone who's reading scripture that, well, yeah, he's coming back. Like at that point you wouldn't say, he's coming back, he's drawing near. You would go, well, there he is, right? Or because it says everyone will see him coming. So I don't think these verses, as I've heard many brilliant teachers point out, they're wonderful pastors, far more qualified than I am, point to these and say, all of these things must be fulfilled. But I don't think that's what Jesus is teaching us. What are we to watch for? If we're to wait until the very moment Christ returns at the second coming at the end of the tribulation. What are we to watch for? What are we to be alert for? These are commands Jesus gives us over and over throughout the scriptures. So I think we can see these things begin to happen. Our generation is unique in being able to see these things, signs that 200 years ago, Christians couldn't point to any single one of these signs, and other signs that we haven't had time to get into in this video today. But we can, and we need to keep that in mind. That is the big picture, guys. We can talk about, and we will talk about on this channel, news developments as they come about. We'll talk about news stories, but sometimes we can get focused on the details, focused on the tree, and miss the whole forest, right? That's the old saying, so focused on the tree, miss the forest for the trees. So we need to be focused on the big picture. And the big picture, guys, is Jesus is right at the door, right? So again, what does that mean? Well, what does it mean to say Jesus is coming soon? Let's look up some definitions. This is from Merriam-Webster of soon. Well, it means without undue time lapse. So just like I've been saying before, Jesus didn't say when you begin to see all these things, a few hundred years might go by, right? A few centuries, maybe, or maybe I'll change my mind. No, he said, then look up. Your salvation draws near. That means, without undue time lapse, I'm approaching. It could mean maybe he's coming tonight or tomorrow, but in the scheme of things, it could be much longer than that. Again, many people, since before I was born, have been saying, we see these signs, he's coming this year, right? So we don't know the day or the time when Jesus comes, but guys, he has approached. That's what he's telling us in these verses. When you begin to see all these things, and we're seeing those things, and we see the development of those things, they may be slow in our mind because we want to speed up the return of Christ. But as somebody who's been studying this for over 30 years, I can tell you we've definitely seen major significant changes in the last 30 years when it comes to seeing these signs appear, seeing them come more to fruition, seeing the stage setting that's taking place in the world that's telling us that nations are lining up, that people are lining up, events are lining up to see the events of the end times, as foretold in the Bible, play out just as we would expect. Here's another definition we have from Britannica on soon. At a time that is not long from now, right? And again, some people are probably very frustrated going, what does that mean? Does that mean I want it to be tomorrow? But it's all I can say is it's not a couple of centuries away, right? Guys, we are right at the door. Jesus is saying to look up. I don't know when he's coming. Nobody else does. But I can tell you this, we can see those events of the end times approaching. And Jesus, in Revelation chapter 3, verse 10, he promises to keep the faithful from the great time of testing that will come upon the whole earth. I believe that is a clear reference to the tribulation period. The rapture of the church, I believe, comes before the events of the 7-year tribulation. And that means that if we can see the nearness of the tribulation period and the second coming of Jesus at the end of that tribulation, then Jesus coming back for the church is even sooner than that. And guys, he's near, he's approaching. That's the big picture that we can focus on. We don't need to get caught up in some of the fads of the time, or, I don't know what that may be, but we don't need to get lost in any one specific news headline or event that's taking place. And again, I talk about those things here on this channel, no doubt about it. But I also always have this big picture view in mind. And just in case you don't, I think that's something that we all need to have. We need to have this big picture view in mind. Whole generations of Christians do not see the signs we see today. And many longed to see the signs that we see today. As Jesus is coming back and Jesus is coming soon. That's his message directly to us. So I encourage you to read those verses, commit that to mind, focus on that. We are in the time, we are in the season of the Lord's return. We don't know how much time we have left, but whatever time we do have left, we should be doing as much as we can to do the work that God has given us. I believe every single person watching this video was put here in this time for a specific purpose. Just as Esther was placed in the position she was and the time she was for a specific purpose. So whatever that purpose is, make sure that you are committed to working on it every day. Make sure you're running the race to the best of your ability. Because guys, Jesus is coming back. And I know we all want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. So guys, keep your eyes focused on the big picture. Jesus Christ, he's coming back soon. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And God willing, I will see you on Friday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to visit my Substack at brittgillette.substack.com. There you'll find my latest videos and articles, as well as notes, where I share the latest news headlines, the articles I'm reading, and the videos I'm watching. Subscribe for free, and each new post on Substack will be sent directly to your email. Just scroll to the bottom of the homepage and hit the subscribe button. As an added bonus, your first welcome email will include a link to a copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt Gillette on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.